Good day, spiritual artists. This is CJ Miller, your host, and today we're going to read chapter 2 of The Spiritual Artist We Are Designed to Create. I'm hoping you taking this opportunity to pull out your journal or even a piece of scratch paper and doodle while you listen to this chapter and get inspired for the day. Quote, humans desire to define God in their image, but we are created in God's image. God is not defined as he, she, or it by animal, mineral, or space itself. God is the all and everything, creatively expanding into eternity. Christopher J. Miller. Chapter 2, Names Separate Us. I'd like to share a key spiritual truth with you that helped me move beyond my singular view and connect with humanity. While I learned to recognize a greater power through painting, I also realized that no singular name could contain all that it is. Words and proper names are human conventions, and we shouldn't let a name separate us from one another. The first step for any spiritual artist is recognizing the limitations of our language. While we argue over proper syntax and word choice, there seems to be one word that we can't seem to agree on. It's the word for God. I shy away from using this word because so many people have built resistance to it, and rightfully so. They've been hurt or damaged by others that have used this word to justify their actions. I was born into a devout Catholic family, and my mother and father raised us in the faith of that church. From our baptism to our confirmation, we followed Catholic dogma. Each Sunday, my siblings and I would pile into the car and attend weekly Mass. Not only did I attend CCD classes at our church as a youth, but I also began leading classes for younger students. I was passionate about right and wrong, and most importantly, helping others. But as I reached sexual maturity, I realized that I wasn't quite like everyone else. I was attracted to those of the same sex, and I quickly became concerned about the church's views on homosexuality. At Sunday Mass, I noticed these judgments echoed through the consciousness of the other church members, and I realized that I was in the wrong category. Not because I was less loving or kind, not because I hurt anyone. I was placed in the wrong category simply because I was attracted to the same sex. Homosexuality was a sin, according to Catholicism. I slowly withdrew from my activities at the church. Assisting in youth classes, painting the facility halls, and volunteering at the church carnival became activities and places where I was unwanted. After much internal debate, I couldn't justify my treatment by the church. I was still the same enthusiastic, loving person who enjoyed leading classes and volunteering in my community. Yet, I was somehow evil if I practiced the love I felt for others. I had to choose between being true to myself or my religious beliefs. By 18 years of age, I had walked away from the word God and any concept of organized religion. This experience happens to many of us. Whether we experience painful life situations or are judged by those who consider themselves God's children, we are often isolated, teased, and hurt in the name of God. Because of this, there's probably not one word in the human language that repels as much as it attracts than the word God. This word has tried to convey so many different meanings to different people that it can push us away from our very own divine connection. I spent a large part of my life in denial of God due to the actions people attributed to this force. During college, I quickly found myself surrounded by others with the same hostile feelings towards a greater power or meaning behind their life experience. I realized that I wasn't alone with my godless situation. There were many others like me. Some relabeled themselves agnostic, while others took a more aggressive stance and labeled themselves as atheists. Many put their word for God and a relationship to God in a box and buried it. But in this process, they lose something that means a great deal, a deep connection to themselves. My journey as a spiritual artist started when I walked away from the G word and anything related to it. Shortly after I graduated from college, I returned to my apartment to find one of my roommates, Danielle, reading a book. It was Living in the Light by Shotki Gawan. I asked her what she was reading, and when she described it, I told her that the word God was no longer in my vocabulary. After all, I was hurt and rejected by people that had used it against me. In truth, it wasn't God, it was unconscious humans that had used the word God in vain. But I couldn't see the difference. She didn't let me off the hook and challenged me. What if you didn't use the word God? She asked. What if you called it something else? At first, I thought her suggestion was rather silly and dismissed it. But after several days, I decided to try it. People have referred to a greater power as God, Allah, Buddha, Jesus Christ, Muhammad, Mother Nature, the Trinity, the One, Source, and many more. But these words limit us by context. We try to force a power that is beyond language into our limited definition of it. Her recommendation was the beginning of my long walk back to God. I've tried using many different words to explain my concept of all that is, but I've realized that any name is limiting and ultimately separates me from others. Rather than let this word stand in the way of recognizing my spirituality, I decided to move past the limits of language. I don't want a name to limit you from a relationship with this power. Everyone is educated in separate ideologies and traditions, but if we step back and look at the situation with a universal perspective, we realize that most of our experience and values are the same. Try this yourself. For the remainder of this book, I'm going to use 12 spaces, and here I show an underline with nothing above it. As a substitute for the word God, please insert your name for the greater power as you read. Humankind has spent far too many years arguing over semantics and not enough time recognizing eternal truth. Language is a limited form of expression and can't possibly define a spiritual presence. I'll say that again. Language is a limited form of expression and can't possibly define a spiritual presence. Not only can a word separate you from a relationship with this greater power, but it can separate you from a relationship with others. Earlier in my life, when I was living without underline, I found myself getting angry at the strangest situation. At the bank or drive-through, the attendant might reply, "Have a blessed day," and my shoulders would contract. Rather than accept these well wishes, my first reaction was one of indignation. How dare they enforce their belief system on me? How ridiculous of me. I was letting their word choice get in the way of the truth in their action. The truth of their activity was to wish me well, but I was allowing their specific word for a greater power to block me from receiving this blessing. Their definition of God had hurt me, and I was twisting their gift into an insult. Instead of recognizing their truth, they wanted to wish me goodness. Words are merely markers for communication. They cannot possibly capture the conscious truth of what they describe. Does the word hummingbird truly capture the essence of this small, darting creature that appears before my window each morning? Can it contain the truth of this tiny bird? It cannot. Words are dualistic by their very nature. They are separate from what they describe. As I write this book to share my ideas, I continually strive for the best possible word choices, but sometimes find that words aren't quite enough. As a passionate communicator, I will continue to shuffle, reorganize, and repattern my word choices in an attempt to communicate something that is clearly beyond words. While I may reach some people some of the time, I will never reach everyone all of the time. Because our desire for God is so strong, there's probably not one word in the human language that causes so many conflicting emotions. This word has tried to convey so many different meanings to different people that it has pushed some of us away from our very own connection. I spent many years in denial of God's existence due to the actions people attributed to this greater power. We should be patient with words. As you continue throughout the next week, try being conscious of how you let this word separate from you others. Practice patience with their word choice. Look for the truth behind their words. Suppose you see a pastor on the television declaring the reality of their God. Substitute your word in his declaration. See if this practice brings you a bit of understanding toward them. You may begin to realize that they are only trying to help. However, if they're declaring beliefs or judgments in the name of God, They may be further from the truth than ideal, but they are still trying. Understand the real motivation behind their actions. Let me make a special note to those who are atheists, agnostic, or somewhere in between. Perhaps you can't see yourself having any recognition of God. That's fine. I was in that position for a long time before I began to look for the truth of my situation. While I refuse to see a large white man with a beard on a throne, I acknowledge that there is a power behind all that I see. I simply look around me. What is this force that has created stars, galaxies, and a planet that revolves around the sun? What force is driving this great planet and the shifting of continents, forests, and rivers? What is the force behind life itself? It's a force of evolution and growth. It's the force of loving expansion, and it does have power. Whatever your scientific word for this power, use it when you see God in the remainder of this book. Humanity is ready to see beyond the limitation of words. It is time to see our truth. This exercise may help you grow closer to the fellow humans and realize that we are working within the limitations of a material world. We're all looking for the perfect name for underline. So, I had an interesting experience this morning, which reminds me of this chapter quite a deal, as I had to take a Uber on the way to a doctor's appointment. And the driver was listening to talk radio. And suddenly I realized how much and how dependent we are on words, and how it's gotten to such a terrible point in our society because we label people with words. We try to group everybody together and we say, oh, those liberals, those conservatives, those Trumpers, those feminists, all these words trying to group people by one word. It is not possible. And so I had to sit there and take a deep breath and remember the spiritual truth as I drove to this doctor's appointment. The spiritual truth of my driver. He was just looking for the truth himself. He was listening to talk radio and he was trying to come to some sort of an idea of how to live life. But what I'm asking you to do is go to the spiritual level. And when I say the spiritual level, I mean the essence of what's behind the word, the feeling, consciousness of it. There is no such thing as a conservative because we all have mixed personality traits. We may be conservative with money, but not so conservative in another source. We may be very liberal with rights, but maybe not so liberal with money. We may think that women should be independent and free, but we're not exactly feminists either. We've got to step back and hold words lightly. And that's what I'm asking you to do in this chapter. So as you go on throughout the day today, I want you to hold your words lightly and realize that they're just an attempt. They are just an attempt to communicate something that is not physical. Words are physical. So by their very nature, they're limited. They can only do so much. It doesn't matter how hard I think about the proper word. And when I wrote this book, trust me, I kept thinking about the proper word to use for God or greater power. Is it really a greater power? Do I mean to say that there's any sense of bowing down to it? So hold words lightly. And when you use words, hold them lightly. And most importantly, which I really wish I could share, but I did spiritually share with this taxi driver or Uber driver, is the thought and presence behind the word. Don't hold the word. Don't believe everything comes under one category. Hold your words lightly, and you'll see that you start connecting with other humans. When we step back from the word or the labeling or the names, we connect with each other and see love. So see love today. Go out there and be a spiritual artist, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast.
Thanks again for listening to the Spiritual Artist Podcast. Whether you're watching this show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or iHeartRadio, make sure you choose the subscribe button so that you will receive updates when new segments are released. Most importantly, be still, listen, and know that you are a spiritual artist.